Hello, hello, everybody. How are we?
We're great.
Good. My name's Sarah Colley. I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator here at the Great Falls Public Library. And we are thrilled to have you all here today on a Thursday evening. And it's a beautiful day out today, right? So thank you all for coming out tonight. We are celebrating one of our very own Great Fallsians. Ken is here tonight, and he's going to be talking about his latest book, Lost Great Falls. So we are thrilled to have a local historian here to chat with us and share all of the cool little tidbits of information that might have been lost over time. The Great Falls Public Library is thrilled to be here and open for you. We are here to connect people and knowledge, and a lot of that knowledge is through author talks such as this. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Ken to the podium. Woo.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you all for coming. I have a feeling that research in libraries has changed so much. When I got moved back to Montana in 2001 full-time, I was here part-time in the 1990s, but I was still working back in Virginia. I was out of the Navy at that point, but anyway, Bob Harris and I, or Tom McIntyre and I, be sitting side by side at microfilm machines, pouring through pages of the newspapers, and of course, the digital revolution has changed that significantly, so that how a library is used has, in my case, changed. I'm not here 6 days a week, or now that they're open 7 days a week, I'd have been here. But in any case, I have the great pleasure this evening to have with me Brian Morger, and I've got to say that when I was considering what to put on the cover of Lost Great Falls, there's a print of this great painting of Brian's in my, it's kind of a combination of my family room and my office, and over my chair is that print, and I took a look at that and I said, last chapter is going to be the very sad demolition of the stack. That is the stack and the whole scene. It's the perfect photo, or perfect painting. And Brian, please come up and talk a little about your motivation in painting that, and also the family that owns it. I've got to give credit to Tom and Mary Jane Heisel for giving permission to use it on the cover. So over to you, Brian.
Thanks. Well, allow me to wax a little philosophical, if you would. Maybe do it myself, but if you don't mind, Ken, wax a little philosophical here.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And speak up, because I don't.
Okay.
You don't have a mic.
Oh, I guess I don't. Yes, okay. I thought that's
That's not the mic.
Yeah. Recently I heard that the present informs the past, or the past informs the future. And I meditated, how is that possible? How does a future know that there's a past? We certainly know that the other vantage point. But then we have to think, how is time involved? Well, time doesn't behave the way that we think it ought to. It's actually a mysterious thing. We think it goes in linear fashion, point A to B. And so I came up with, I started thinking, well, I've heard of time bending, time twisting, time looping around, time speeding up. We all know that. I mean, we've all experienced how time can be relative. When you're a kid, summers last forever. Winters last forever. if you're in, at one certain, the only place you really experience time is when you're doing it. Otherwise, it goes very quickly. And sometimes it comes to a complete stop. You've heard of, time froze. Well, so the past, the present, and the future must be interconnected. And I thought, well, how does it interconnect? Well, it interconnects emotionally. And that's why Ken writes his books. Why I love history. This is why I paint history. Because there's communicating this feeling. You can't know where you're going until you know where you come from. So in this image, I wanted to portray a forgotten time, almost forgotten time, although as time passes, there's fewer and fewer people who actually remember the stack. I'm surprised there are some kids, oh yeah, I know about the stack. They don't know that it was 504 feet tall. It was once the tallest man-made structure west of the Mississippi. And so in order for me to really have fun with this one, I wanted to insert myself into the work. And it's probably the only painting I've put myself into. And I have a Schwinn Black Phantom flyer. Always wanted to have one. And when I finally made my own money, I bought one, and I still ride it around town with the light on, and feel like I can ride into the past. And so, I actually had a kid on the bike. I didn't portray him; I portrayed myself. But this is a scene overlooking the Anaconda smelter area. It's mid-60s, and the only thing that remains there is the powerhouse, and of course the dam structure. But behind, the only thing that remains is the B&M barn. Yes, which was built, I think, in 1902. Yeah, and it's still there, and so we're also in the process of trying to save it. And anyway, I guess to sum it up, history is fun. History can take places. Sometimes maybe the future. Thank you.
Brian, thank you so much for capturing so much history in Great Falls and Fort Benton. The historic buildings that Brian has kept us all aware of through his art is pretty amazing. So, few cities have ever fostered a greater nostalgia for their past, a yearning for the way things once were, than Great Falls. And, I write that, I believe that, and I believe it's because Great Falls grew from the time the railroad arrived in 1887 and the dam was completed and the Boston and Montana opened a copper smelter and then a refinery, and all through the 90s was this dramatic period of growth. And that continued, but then the homestead era kicked in the early 1900s, and the land around us became, if they weren't ranches, they were farms, and a lot of homesteaders didn't make it, but a lot did, and our ancestors, and I know mine did, and stayed with it and stayed on the land. So Great Falls, in something less than about 50 years, maybe as much as 60 years, became the largest city in Montana. That's remarkable. And of course, Great Falls, because it was formed so late, didn't have the vigilantes, didn't have those exciting gold rush and territorial days. In fact, there were only 5 years left in our long territorial period, our 25 years as a territory. There were only 5 years left from 1884 when Paris Gibson and the rest of them began the town site, and they built the Vinegar Jones cabin, and thank goodness we have that one building left from the first year of the town site. So Great Falls grew dramatically, and of course, it really accelerated again during World War II between the 1940 to 1950, huge growth in population. It was quite a time. So I thought it would be fun today to talk a little bit about and read some from 3 of the chapters. One is, of course, the Valeria Library, and Valeria being Paris Gibson's wife, because of her health and perhaps other reasons, she didn't spend much time in Great Falls. And in the 90s, when she finally did arrive, it was a pretty sad period for her. She was in a wheelchair, but she was certainly supportive in ways like gathering collections to provide to a brand new library. So let me read just a bit about the first library. In Great Falls' 3rd year, 1886, when the town had just 600 residents, editor Will Hanks of the Tribune advocated for a fire department, a church, and a public library. Methodist minister John Reed and others began canvassing to establish a free library and reading room that fall. The Manitoba Railroad arrived the next year, and Great Falls commenced serious growth. Yet it was not until May 1889 that real action began for a library, with a meeting chaired by Herbert Chowan in the Great Falls Townsite Company office. At the meeting, the Townsite Company promised a lot on 2nd Avenue North and 3rd Street. Actually, the lot they provided first is Library Park, where Valeria Library was located. During Herbert Chowan met Valeria Gibson at the Gibson home in Minneapolis and received her promise to donate a collection of books from her friends. Paris Gibson donated a valuable 39-volume Works of Herbert Howe Bancroft. That's a classic historical work that for many decades, that was kind of the core of history in your collection if you had those 39 volumes. And O.C. Mortson donated the pride of the collection, which was the Encyclopedia Britannica, prestigious then as it is still. As plans for the Valeria Art and Library Association, and you notice it's more than a library, it was an art and society and library association, matured in the fall of '89. The townsite donated the lot worth $4,000, a lot of money in those days. And building fundraising began. Shares cost $5 each, and fundraising was led by Paris Gibson with a donation of $500, Robert Vaughn and Chowan with $250 each, and others who purchased from 1 to 25 shares. Later, the Townsite Company donated a second adjoining lot, which is, of course, the lot we're on here. The site of what became the Carnegie Library in 1903 and today's great public library. Library plans were spurred on by public sentiment among the rapidly growing population. Many of the new residents were young single men, and one of them expressed the need for a library well in his letter to the editor of the Tribune. He wrote, "Now that the winter months are upon us and the nights are cool, some place of resort should be provided for the young men of the city that will be free from the temptations of city life the bars downtown. Many young men are living in rooms which have no conveniences for fire, and they must spend their evenings and leisure hours elsewhere, somewhere. Let us have a reading room and public library, signed one of the young men. By mid-December 1889, the Valeria Art and Library Association, then with 450 volumes, found a temporary home, and it went through several temporary locations before the building was finally completed. On January 30th, 1890, librarian Robert Williams, which of course that most of you have seen is the Valeria Library. And that's Robert Williams, who was a very well-educated botanist and apparently quite a crackerjack librarian to begin the process. The library offered 2 rooms to patrons who paid $1 per month. It was not a free public library to begin with. And it was open every day from 1 to 5 o'clock in the afternoon and from 7 to 10 in the evening, obviously catering to those young men and women that had working jobs and only had evening leisure time. Art exhibits and concerts were held by local talent as well as visiting groups such as the Mendelssohn Quintet of Boston. In October 1890, Hunt and Holscher completed structural plans for the Valeria Library building, and contracts were let to Buckingham and Olson for $1,355, and to G.H. Graham for cut stone work, and to the McKay brothers for brickwork. And so plans continued, and the building was taking place. Located on 3rd Street North between 2nd and 3rd Avenues, the new Valeria Library stood 1 story in height and was divided into 4 rooms. The entrance opened onto a cozy vestibule and the librarian's room. A hallway led to the main reading room, which was 16 by 33 feet. I mean, this was a really small building, and the rooms obviously were small. Connected to the larger reading room by folding doors was a smaller room for private study, about half the size of the first, and a broad alcove with bookshelves. A basement beneath contained a furnace. The rooms were all well lit by windows, those in front having neat colored transoms of cut glass, and you can see some of that cut glass today. If you go to the 3rd floor Montana room, those from the Valeria Library are still on display in the Montana room. Construction began in late November of 1890 and proceeded rapidly through the winter to completion. When the new Valeria Library formally opened on Monday, March 9th, 1891, a major art exhibit was held for the benefit of the library fund. The exhibition featured several hundred etchings and watercolors by modern artists obtained from New York, especially for the occasion. Artistically and financially, the exhibition was a success, drawing huge crowds and many buyers for the works of art. So the library was off to a good start, and it continued on through the 1890s, but so did the dramatic growth in population. So a small library in a fast-growing town didn't necessarily fit too well, and by the early 1900s it was clear that the town had outgrown Valeria Library, and contact with the Carnegie organization led to a grant, as many Montana towns successfully got to build their Carnegie libraries, and some of those Carnegie libraries, like Lewistown and others around the state, are still in operation. Fort Benton's Carnegie Library is still operating. And of course, the Valeria, as it was replaced by the Carnegie Library, went through a whole series of other uses. I think it was the very first YWCA in Great Falls. It became, right after World War I, it became the first Veterans Center. Even before it was called the American Legion, the Veterans Group met there, and so on. And in fact, in one way or the other, on to the 1950s, I think books were stored there from this the Carnegie Library and so on. But in 1962, the Larry Library was demolished, clearing the way for Library Park. Today, the first cultural center in Great Falls is remembered through the photographic displays in the Great Falls Public Library and the beautiful stained glass windows hanging in the Montana Room. The Larry Library began the tradition of exceptional library service in the Great Falls community. I'll move, since I want to do some justice to 3 chapters, I'll move quickly to the second. And the second is one of these all the chapters I found fun, and if my publisher, the History Press, hadn't had a word limit, it would have been about a 600-page book. And I did have to cut a few chapters that I really regret the loss of in Great Falls, like the YMCA building and the men's YMCA building and the St. Thomas Orphanage. And I hated to lose those chapters, but I remembered them, and I mean, there's so many places that you could talk about. People have asked me about several of them. They were victims of word space. I tried to sort of have a sampling in different categories. There were some maybe that were a little stretch for my publisher, but they went along with me, like the strategic ford across the Missouri River. To me, that's the first great location in Great Falls. There were fords, natural fords with hard rock bottoms and relatively shallow waters on the Missouri River, only about every 40 or so miles. The next one down is at Fort Benton, right by the fort. And there are stories of the Blackfeet crossing right there in Fort Benton on their way to the Judith and to the Mussel Shell for their winter hunting. And the same thing's true here with the stories of the Crows crossing into Sun River to do some mischief with the Blackfoot, and vice versa, the Blackfoot, or for that matter, the thousands and thousands of bison roaming between the Sun River Valley and the Judith Basin. They all crossed right here at Great Falls, right between the Railroad Bridge and the First Avenue North Bridge there that is kind of the center of the west side. That I found an attempt by a Rice Motors guy in the 1970s to drive a Jeep across, successfully did that, and kind of a reminder that even with the dams and everything, that ford could be crossed. So, you know, I have lots to select from, and I think you'll enjoy the ones. A lot of them are not well known. I mean, how many of you knew that Great Falls had its very own railroad, both within the city as trolleys, but between Great Falls and Lethbridge? And of course, what greater reminder for us of that shared close relationship and heritage we have with the prairie provinces of Canada, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba, than to have that chapter on the Galt, Alexander Galt, built railroad between Lethbridge and Great Falls. Didn't last long, and Great Northern kind of fought it all away, but it was built and it succeeded, and it certainly helped fuel the population of northern Montana and places like Conrad and also on the farms and so on. So let's jump to the great Grand Opera. In a passionate editorial in February 1891, so again, this is 7 years after Great Falls began, the leader challenged the Great Falls Board of Trade to build an opera house for the 6 years old at the time, which was beginning to undergo dramatic growth. Everybody believes that Great Falls should have an opera house, and that an almost absolute necessity calls for its erection during the present season. The leader is ready to encourage any enterprise that will supply the need if the Board of Procrastination, the Board of Trade, can do anything to reach the desired end. All good and well, but experience does not teach that much could be accomplished in that trap. Not too kind to the Board of Trade, but they were not moving out fast enough. A stock company was quickly formed, and by April an opera house seemed almost assured. Plans were moving forward for a large building on the corner of 3rd Street and 2nd Avenue North. Probably next to the big stack, the greatest loss that Great Falls suffered was that stone opera house. Didn't fit with television, didn't fit with movies for that matter. It was designed for the vaudeville ages in those early years, and yet it was built, and it was not only built, but it was built right. Oscar Cobb, the architect, he was a theatrical architect who went on to a stunning career designing some 200 theaters and opera houses, including the grand opera houses in St. Paul and Minneapolis. And in late June of 92, Oscar Cobb arrived in Great Falls with plans in hand and met a reporter for the Tribune and provided insight into the plans. And as I do through each of the chapters, I draw as much primary source. If it's a description of what the architect has in his hands, I use the Tribune's words or his words, because I like to present that instead of my regurgitation and my distillation of what they said. Here's what they actually said. So the opera house was built, and it was built to acclaim, and 1895, that opera house was in use when none other than Mark Twain came to visit Great Falls, and on July 29th, he spent the day and probably tired out by the time he got to the opera house, because the Gibson boys, Ted and Phil, had a tour for him, the Giant Springs and around the sites, the dams, and the dam at that point, and the falls, and he visited immigrant camps. I mean, he was interested in everything. And he declared Great Falls was a prettier town than Denver was at that point. And he went into the talk that evening at the Opera House and gave his usual stunning performance. And yet it didn't turn out all that well. I mean, the place was packed. I think it had about 1,500, which was capacity there for his talk, and they appreciated every word. I mean, if you've seen Hal Holbrook reenact Mark Twain, you get just a glimpse of what it must have been like to have Mark Twain on stage. He was magic, and he thrilled them that evening. But the crowd didn't exactly thrill him because, of course, at that point, this was midway through 1895, just a few months before. The editor of the Leader, Herbert Percy Rolfe, had died of typhoid fever, and his wife, Martha Edgerton Rolfe, had taken over the Daily Leader, the first woman in Montana to run a hands-on run the daily newspaper and did a bang-up job. And she had an interview with Mark Twain that evening, and here's what Martha reported. And it was in the form of a leader editorial she wrote called A Public Nuisance. A leader representative, she's too modest to say I, in a recent interview with Mark Twain, asked him if continued lecturing followed by receptions was not very fatiguing to him. He replied that there was only one place where he was beat, and that he was quite worn out. It was none other than Great Falls where this occurred, and was due to the thoughtlessness, if we may not call it discourtesy, of his audience. Long after the lecture was begun, people came straggling into the Opera House to the intense annoyance of the lecturer and of all those who cared to hear what he had to say. Some of those late arrivals evidently attended for no other purpose than to attract attention. They spent their time in half-audible conversation and only showed their good sense by leaving before the lecture was complete, thus giving those who cared to listen an opportunity to hear the finale. Mark Twain has often remarked upon the humility and meekness shown by the American citizens in the presence of a public nuisance. He has also urged that less submission should be shown and that the said American citizens should kick and kick vigorously until the nuisance is abated. Anyway, she caught this most remarkable. I don't know, I've read Mark Twain biographies, and I saw Hal Holbrook just because Navy had me in Alameda in 1960, and Hal Holbrook had just begun his reenactments. I caught him in Oakland. So I've been following Mark Twain one way or the other for years and years, and I have never seen anything resembling the words that Martha Rolfe captured from him that evening. It must have really agitated him, and she caught it and presented it in the pages of the Leader. Pretty remarkable. Let me catch up here. That was in the paper announcing that his performance was coming. So let's sail on to the third one. We're doing pretty well for time. The third one is, I'd heard of Black Eagle Park, but I didn't know anything near as much until after I'd done extensive research. It's just amazing to me that the first outdoor entertainment center in Great Falls was where today's Centene Stadium and the golf course is. That's where Black Eagle Park was. It wasn't over at Black Eagle. There's a park there today, but that's Johnny Come Lately. This is the original entertainment center, and it was something else. It was operated until 1911, so all through the 90s, it was operated by the trolley, the Great Falls Railway Company, the trolley company, and they did it well, and they did remarkable things, and I'm going to spend most of my time in talking about Black Eagle Park in relation to a pretty amazing trip that Charlie Russell made that connects in with it. But before I do that, let me read just a little bit about a new pleasure resort opening, and that's Black Eagle Park. It'll be formally opened, and this is, if I know a date, early 90s. Great Falls is to have a new pleasure resort at the Black Eagle Falls. The grounds around the pavilion have been fixed up and transformed into a beautiful park, and certainly no lovelier spot could be selected for a park and summer garden. Nature has done about everything necessary to make it an ideal spot for visitors to spend an hour or two, and the little that was left for man to complete the attractiveness of the place has been accomplished with taste and thoroughness. In the first place, a large tract of land has been put down to bluegrass lawn and a fountain built in the center of which will be filled with fish. A number of swings for the children have been erected and hammocks provided for the ladies. A large building provided with chairs has been erected for a dining hall for parties. It's built on the edge of the bluff overlooking the rushing falls, meaning Black Eagle Falls, of the river. 3 large summer houses have been built, 9 by 14, with lattice work and trailing vines planted to cover them. They're furnished with chairs and tables and electric lights inside. The electric city had electricity everywhere. 7 smaller summer houses similarly equipped and vine-covered adorn other portions of the bluff and park. A man has been employed to keep everything in order and see that the place is kept respectable and attractive to ladies and families who desire to spend the afternoon or evening there. Every Tuesday and Friday evening and every Sunday afternoon, Robert Johnson will give an entertainment or concert at the pavilion. After the work days entertainment, there will be a dance, and a small admission will be charged for seats in the main pavilion. The use of the garden and the grounds are entirely free, and the public are cordially invited to make use of the privileges in any proper manner. Disorderly characters will be promptly barred from the privileges. However, it's designed to make the park a favorite place or resort for those desiring to have an outing and enjoy the beautiful surroundings and scenery of the views. So it was opened, and it had skating in the winter. It had baseball in the summer, and one of the I couldn't spare the words to have all I'd like about the baseball team in 1900, which had this promoter, honest John McCloskey, who had major league experience, and here he was in Great Falls, Montana, leading the Great Falls team to in a league of Great Falls teams. Butte and other towns had teams, and honest John McCloskey had tracked down and signed this young shortstop, this sparkling youngster, pretty boy Tinker, they called him. And of course, Tinker went on to the Chicago Cubs within a few years, and that great saying that we baseball fans all love is Tinker to Evers to Chance about double plays.
Wow.
No double play infield was ever better than Tinker to Evers to Chance, and that was Joe Tinker, pretty boy Tinker from Great Falls, Montana. Didn't grow up here, but he played here. So there's great stories. The Fort Shaw Indian boys, when Fred Campbell took over as superintendent in 1899 of the off-reservation boarding school, the boarding school, they're under a lot of heat. Part of it's absolutely correctly placed, part of it's extreme. But in the case of Fred Campbell, there are many descendants of his, the DeRochers, for instance, on the Blackfoot Reservation, who speak passionately about how well the Fort Shaw Indian Industrial School treated their family members that attended. So it's, you know, we don't need to turn this into a debate over off-reservation boarding schools, except to say that Fred Campbell was an enlightened educator. He brought the latest in sports to the school, and he brought his boys football team to Black Eagle Park, and they'd have games against the other high school teams around the state and draw 700 or more to the games. And of course, Campbell did the same thing with the girls, and he had just had one of his staff come to Fort Shaw from Carlisle, and she had brought with her the game of basketball, which of course was very new. I mean, it was really got underway in the 90s, and when he picked it up about 1900, it was very new. And he taught it to the Josephine Langley, his staff member that knew the game and had played at Carlisle. They taught the girls, and this was so early. This was 1903, 1904, for instance, when Great Falls High School didn't have basketball teams. So Fred Campbell brought the girls' teams to, in good weather, they'd play out at Black Eagle Park. In the fall and winter, they'd play their games in Luther's Hall, which later became the Eagles Lodge downtown. But the point I'm making is that they were so popular, they'd draw from 700 to 1,000 to their games, and the Great Falls residents treated the Fort Shaw teams like their own because they didn't have a high school basketball team, and those girls from Fort Shaw were their team, whether they were playing in Luther's Hall or out at Fort Shaw. So it was some period, the first aircraft to fly out of Great Falls flew from right next to Black Eagle Park, and the pilot happened to be a pretty amazing guy. He was Eugene Ely. He had been the previous year, this is 1911, the previous year, 1910, he had been the first aviator to fly an aircraft off a Navy ship. And here he was the next year in Great Falls, Montana, barnstorming and flying off Black Eagle Park. But I want to spend a little more remaining time to talk a little about Charlie, and let me catch up a little here. Because in this September of 1904, Charlie Russell with two of his friends got on the Great Northern and went to Fort Assiniboine near Havre. And they must have taken their horses with them because he had Nina, which was his replacement in 1904 for Monty. He had a fairly new horse, young boy, his Cree friend had found this horse, Nina. And so Charlie and the two friends from Great Falls joined the 3rd Cavalry at Fort Assiniboine, and they marched overland. It must have taken them it took them 4 days to arrive in Fort Benton, and they spent the night in Fort Benton. I show these are all taken during that trip. Here the 3rd Cavalry is having a formation of presenting sabers. Here's Charlie with Nina. And here's Charlie with his back turned with several of the officers. And again, so it wasn't just the 3rd Cavalry, it was 6 troops from the 3rd Cavalry, but it was also 4 companies from the 24th Infantry, and the 24th Infantry was a, quote, colored African-American infantry unit stationed at Fort Assiniboine at that time. And so 4 of the companies marched while the 3rd Cavalry rode from Fort Assiniboine first to Fort Benton. And these are taken of their camp in Fort Benton. There was a young photographer, Walter Dean, that just happened to have arrived in Fort Benton a year before, in the previous year, and he had a camera set up in one of the drugstores. He took one of the cameras and took photos around. So thank goodness we have a few photos from the 24th Infantry, the Black Infantry. And this famous photo Walter Dean took. And it's Charlie on it, obviously on the right, and two cavalry officers. It's a very famous photo taken in front of the Joe Sullivan Saddlery in Fort Benton. So they stayed overnight in Fort Benton, and they camped at, just north of the fort, and they had a ball for them in Green's Opera House in Fort Benton, and then the next day got underway for Great Falls. And they were supported by these Army wagon train of mule-led wagon train. So there's a segment in the book about the trip, and Charlie arrived with them. They came over the 15th Street Bridge, went into camp at Black Eagle Park, and they became both the cavalry and the infantry set up separate camps, and they were stars of the county fair that year. And then later, of course, they did all kinds of riding exhibits at the park. They drew thousands of, every day when they'd break camp and go through their routine in the morning, there'd be hundreds of people from Great Falls out there. The trolley was, of course, connected, so the trolley would take them right out there. So anyway, pretty amazing, kind of a highlight of the many, many highlights of Black Eagle Park. And of course, I can't end without a little nostalgia over the loss of the stack. Brian's painting is such a great reminder. I know when I was a kid, I'm old enough that when we'd come in from our Choteau County farm, my sister and I always had a contest of who'd spot the stack first, and I think every kid that came to Great Falls had that foremost in their mind of Great Falls, was seeing the stack and then getting to Great Falls. And of course, the stack was built in 1909. I give in the last chapter the story of the stack, and I also I tie this to something that I think Great Falls needs to wake up and begin to be proud of, and begin to shout out to Montana and the world for that matter. And that is Great Falls' role in the copper story, and the copper story central to the rapid growth was the emergence of copper as the greatest treasure in Montana. We're talking 1890s. The Treasure State copper that was mined in Butte, smelted in Anaconda, and refined in Great Falls. Not an inch of the wire of the world came out of Butte. It came out of Great Falls. We don't have a single interpretive sign that I know of in Great Falls today that says anything like this. And Butte tells the copper story. They were everything. Of course they mined it, and for a while they did some smelting there. And then they shifted the Boston, Montana to Great Falls. And it was smelted here for more than a decade until Anaconda got going. And then Anaconda became the big player. And thank goodness Anaconda's preservation people marched smartly to the front and saved their stack when Anaconda was, or when Arco was going to tear it down. And it stands proudly in Anaconda today. Now, I'm not sure that the stack here was structurally sound enough. Some good structural engineers tell me it absolutely wasn't. And I know it absolutely wasn't when they took the 100 bands, iron bands that had been around the stack off of this stack and put them on Anaconda's stack to reinforce it. But anyway, I don't have to remind you, if you're at all old timers here, how important the stack was. But let me just end by reading what I end with. And, you know, I looked for what were the best sentiments, what were the best words spoken when the stack came down. Now, I was in London at the Navy headquarters, the Deputy Chief of Staff for Intelligence, and at the time the stack came down. So I missed it all. I'd have probably been part of the woefully unsuccessful Save the Stack group. But what I found among many good writings about the loss of the stack, I think Rich Ecke captured that woeful scene better than probably anybody else. And this is what Rich wrote. They brought their dogs, kids, cameras, cowboy hats, soccer balls, and blankets, but they didn't bring much cheer with them. Up on Wire Mill Road, Gary Smith hadn't brought his girlfriend. She wouldn't come. She thinks it's like watching someone die, he said. Mostly it was quiet, as many stayed in their cars. Others spread out along a sloping field. Then they waited, just like clockwork. The Simmons oil refinery siren sounded at 10:05 a.m. 5 minutes later, dynamite exploded. And the stack fell to rubble, almost. Standing erect after the smoke cleared was a large sliver of stack looking like a broken pastry shell. Many in the crowd hooted and clapped. It was a fitting near end to the stack. To many, it confirmed suspicions that the stack was a lot stronger than experts were saying. Bitterness and cynicism were common, and underneath it all was a general feeling of helplessness. I love the stack and they blew it, said Bing Crosby later that afternoon at Collins Park in Black Eagle. By evening, the demolition crew had finally finished off the stack, and a scaled-back crowd lingered for a moment. That's it, one man said, and there was nothing more to say. So the meaning, through the eyes and tears of many thousands of Great Falls residents, the big stack died slowly and defiantly that Saturday afternoon. The public execution of this beloved landmark not only symbolically ended Great Falls' industrial era, but also knocked the wind out of the community's sails for decades to come. The loss of the thousands of jobs triggered a downward economic spiral coupled sadly with a devastating blow to community pride. The big stack, the mascot that became a historical landmark, the symbol of Great Falls, was lost. And with that, I would just emphasize and urge you to join us in, again, it may be a futile effort to raise several $100,000 to save the one remaining building. And that building, if we can save it, stabilize it, and convince the city commission who owns it, and Park and Rec, who seem favorable to the idea, to turn it into an interpretive center, an event center. And that's where we can tell the copper story. Great Falls' key role in the copper story that wired the world. So, and in addition to the contribution I've made, I'm going to donate $1 from every sale of a book. So with that, thank you very much. Yes?
So I just wanted to point out, I was fortunate enough to have you and Richard in the studio at KGPR talking about the barn project. Anyone that wants to hear 30 minutes on that topic can go to kgpr.org and click on the podcasts and listen to that interview. and get more of the history. You did a great job of talking about it, and Rich was there, and part of the Save the Stack campaign as well. And then I had a question for you as well, though.
Sure.
What happened to the books that were originally donated by Paris Gibson and his wife?
You know, I'm sure they were integrated into the overall collection. I don't know of any special markings they have. You know, I don't know that today they might have a book plate that says, you know, from Valerie, Valeria. I mean, I don't know that that was done. I've never heard there was any way to identify them. There may be a few of them in the Montana room today. There may be a few still in the collection. I don't think the Bancroft collection is still around, although I shouldn't say that. Parts of it could be, but there's, yeah, who knows? Yes?
That last picture you showed of the barn, is that on Black Eagle golf course?
Yeah, it's a big white barn. We're decades behind in trying to save it. I mean, I know that our Historic Preservation Commission had it photographed in 2005 when the city first talked about having it demolished. And we convinced them at that time not to demolish it, but also had a professional photographer do a lot of work. It's had a lot of problems, foundation problems. One of the more peculiar problems relates to the last use of the barn, at least the last I'm aware of, and it was used by employees around the smelter as a basketball court. And so to make a little better ceiling situation, they removed some of the structural, and that was a bad idea. They never replaced them, and so that ceiling that has collapsed, I'm sure, is a result of that. The good news is it made it through the winter without further collapse. The Great Falls Cascade County Historic Preservation Commission has had professional structural report done so that we know, you know, the steps it will take to save it, to stabilize it. And we also regrettably know that our construction costs will be to do all of that. And we also know that the city commission's patience is not going to be indefinite. They've given us some time, but to raise several $100,000 is a daunting task. Anything you can do to contribute, including talking to wealthy friends, it would be greatly appreciated. But you know, it kind of boils down to the stack probably was not structurally sound enough. The barn is, despite the roof, the last year's roof cave-in, is still structurally strong enough, but we don't have a lot of time. And we're going to have to raise that money and get going. And if we don't save that, that means not a single building remains from the industrial period. And we need, I think, to be proud of that period. A lot of ancestors and people currently in Great Falls worked there. If they all contribute even a fairly modest amount, I think we'd have a pretty substantial amount of money. But how do you reach people then? Somebody once told me, I think it was Ellen Seaver, told me to fundraise, you have to ask people 6 times before they will finally, you know, you get hit from all directions by fundraising. You know it well. Anyway, thank you all. And Brian has been visually inscribing wonderful little scenes which will be part of books that if you care to pick up.
All right, thank you all so much for coming out tonight. Thank you, Ken. As always, we always have things going on here at the Great Falls Public Library. Just a reminder that Music in the Park is going on. And the next one is on Tuesday at 7 p.m. and it's Big Sky Country. They're a local country band. So we will see you in the park on Tuesday. Thank you again.